I wish the machine wouldn't tell me that the recording is in progress, but there it is. Okay, welcome. We're recording session number 3 of Introduction to Christian Doctrine. And today we'll begin looking at the first unit of our introductory material. This is where we will get into what are the areas of doctrine that all Christians are supposed to agree on. Now, it's not true. All Christians don't agree about much of anything. But if we're going to be orthodox, if we're going to call ourselves Christian and be honest about it, then there are some things that we all have to agree on. And it's a surprisingly long list of details. And these things we share in common, not only with other evangelicals, but with Protestants in general who are not nutcase left-wing liberals, with Roman Catholics, with the Eastern Orthodox churches. We all share these same things. So we're going to begin today looking at a unit called We Are Christians. That is to say, there are doctrines that we all share. And this starts out with the idea of God himself, what the theologians like to call theology proper. Theology, of course, is the whole study of everything that God has revealed. Theology proper asks questions about the nature of God himself, the attributes of God, the works of God. And these are things that the Christians have been concerned about, have studied, have searched the scriptures for since the beginning of Christianity, as a matter of fact, all the way back into the Jewish roots. But the New Testament reveals some things about God that weren't in the Old Testament or were mysterious in the Old Testament. So we look at the New Testament to see what it is about our idea of God that distinctively makes us Christian. And there's some areas here that are important. We're going to begin with the very idea of God himself. If we were going to talk about God, we would there are some things that just follow. God is, well, what is God? For one thing, he exists. Those who believe or those who trust God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Hebrews 11:6. If you don't believe there is a God, then none of the rest of salvation, none of the rest of theology is of any significance at all. To believe that there is no God is the essence of foolishness. We call it atheism. To attempt to live as though there is no God. It's a very stupid thing to do. And yet we find larger and larger proportions of mankind have chosen to live as though there is no God. But it is common sense to recognize that God is. Secondly, God is light as opposed to darkness. 1 John 1:5, God is light, in him is no darkness at all. The idea that light comes from God in the creation narrative, Genesis 1:3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Light is the essence of energy itself. For all the way from DC to daylight, every kind of energy that exists, whether it be magnetism or nuclear power or ultraviolet light or X-rays or whatever it is, operates according to the same principles and was not merely created by God, but is consistent with his essence. Energy itself comes from God in the same way that matter itself comes from God. God is light. God is love. 1 John 4:8. In this we know love, that God loved us enough to send Jesus. Love is of the essence of God. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, Psalm 86. God is holy. The holiness of God is his separateness. He is not a part of creation. He is above, beyond creation. He is also morally or ethically righteous, in the sense that he has righteousness in himself. He is holy and utterly separate from sin. These ideas make sense to us when we think about the very idea of God. These things just form a part of that. It makes sense. The reason for that is that mankind has an inner sense of the presence of God. Everyone has an inner awareness of God. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, spoke of a God-shaped vacuum. There is a hole in each of our souls that is just the right shape for God. If we don't know God and we have no way of getting a hold of a Bible, there are no Christians about, we still try to fill that emptiness with something. So everyone sooner or later picks some kind of a God. Most of the time that forms a man-made religion, which is way short of what God intends for us. So everyone has this inner awareness of God. Romans 1 is the classic passage for everyone who is observant, who is looking at the world that actually exists, will notice that we have an incredibly well-designed and obviously purpose-built universe. The created world is an amazing thing. Let's read this. I want to remind you of some of the things from Romans that are important. We call this general revelation or natural law. That which is known about God is evident within them, mankind, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they, mankind, are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations. Their foolish heart was darkened. Okay, all men know God. They may walk away from God. They may deny that they know God, but all men know God. And there's not a way of getting around that. And because of that, they are without excuse. The choice to worship something less than God is the essence of sin. Okay, so here we have God who created the universe, and man, who has some questions about it, really has no excuse. He should be able to see what's going on. So where does the Bible start? Well, the Bible starts in Genesis 1:1 with the creation. This is the Sistine Chapel, by the way. Those of you in Italy should try to find time in your schedule, take a vacation day, and visit the Vatican Museum. There's actually several museums, but the big one that's available for tourists. Just walk through there And on the way through, you'll go through the Sistine Chapel. And this is God in the act of creation as visualized by Michelangelo. Now, I kind of think he looks a little too stern for for God, but Michelangelo liked that. He looks like somebody's angry Italian uncle, but nevertheless, God in creation, the creation of the heavens and the earth. This is something that the Bible simply assumes. The Bible doesn't begin with an argument for God. There is no logical proof for the existence of God found in the Bible. The Bible just starts here. In the beginning, God. He needs no proof. He simply is. I've always believed that questioning the existence of God is simply nonsense. It's irrational. But you'll find lots of people who think otherwise. Okay, where am I going here? The second assumption is that God has life in himself. That is, his life is not granted by another. He is life itself. All other life is shared by him. God shares life with his creatures. Let's see if I can get there it is. Jeremiah 10:10. But the Lord is the true God, the living God, the everlasting King. He causes the clouds to ascend from the end of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain and brings out the wind from his storehouses. The Exodus 3:14 passage, I think, is telling. I am that I am, or I am in and of myself. God is not a created being. He is not merely an idea or a power that is generated by other life forms. God is in and of himself and cannot not exist. Okay. So back in the 17th century, there were a group of English theologians, mostly Puritans. And one of these days we'll have to do some church history so you know who the Puritans were. But the Puritans are very important in the development of what we call Reformed or Protestant theology. They did some of the most remarkable work studying the scriptures and laying out theology of anybody in all of history. So according to question 4 of the Westminster Catechism, who is God is the question. And the answer is, God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. Well, that's a mouthful. And those Westminster divines, those theologians, knew what they were talking about when they said God is infinite and eternal and unchangeable. And they went on to say he is infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in each of 7 categories. Look how this works. So he is infinite in his being, his wisdom, his power, his holiness, his justice, his goodness, and his truth. We can take that apart as well. Infinite meaning having no boundaries. So when we talk about the existence or the being of God, what are the limits of God's existence? Well, there are none. How wise is God? Well, he is infinitely wise, and so on. The same is true for his eternality. Eternality means God is not bound by time. So he doesn't have a beginning point or an ending point. His wisdom doesn't have a starting point. His goodness never ends, and so on. Unchangeable. So God doesn't grow in his being. He is eternally the same. He doesn't grow in his wisdom. He doesn't make mistakes and learn from them. God is perfect from the beginning and unchangeable. The truth, as expressed in Revelation, is infinite. God knows more than all of the knowledge of all of the wisest men in all of the world, and always will. When we get to heaven, we'll get just a taste of that up to our abilities. But we'll never know everything that God knows, because his knowledge is infinite, eternal. God has been good since before there was sin. God will continue to be good eternally. He cannot change. So interesting idea, the unchangeableness, the eternality of God, the infinity of God applied to each of his attributes. This is, of course, what we call a pregnant sentence. The Westminster Catechism goes on to define everything here, and we're not going to do that, but it can be done. Okay, actually, as a lot of theologians would agree, there can be no real definition of God. God is utterly unlike anything else. He's not like a pickup truck, only he has a bigger engine, or he's not like a supernova, except he doesn't explode. There's no real good likeness for God. Now, for that reason, there are no words in human language to define God. And this language barrier makes it difficult to say anything about God directly. To whom will you liken me, that I should be his equal, says the Holy One in Isaiah 40. I mean, who you're going to say I'm bigger than a draft horse? Well, that's obvious. More powerful than a locomotive? Well, of course he is. To whom will you liken me, that I should be his equal? God is wholly other. That is, he is unique. So, in a sense, God exists behind a kind of a curtain, because it is very difficult to find words to actually define him. It's like God is on the other side of a line, and we can try, but never really quite get there. To speak about God, instead, we must use a kind of analogy. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face continually. Now, we know what the psalmist means there in Psalm 105, but God isn't hiding. He doesn't have muscles that are strong. He doesn't have a face. We know that God is a spirit. He is infinitely powerful. And ultimately, because he's invisible, we can't find him. So what are we talking about? But we know what this means. This is an analogy. So God can be found. When we seek the Lord, we can find him, even though he's invisible. He has revealed himself, first in creation and then in the scriptures. If we look at the creation and wonder who created this, and then go to the Bible to find out, we're going to find God there. So he is findable, and yet he is still invisible. God is said to have a face, which of course he doesn't literally. This is what we sometimes call anthropomorphic language. Anthropos is the Greek word for man, and anthropology is a word we use to describe the study of man, usually ancient man. Anthropomorphic language is speaking of God with some human attributes that we can relate to. So in most of the Bible's descriptions of God, and therefore most of theology, we use the language of analogy. Anthropomorphic language, figurative language, we find ways of speaking of God using the words that we have available. Historically, theology has been controversial, at least partially because different cultures use different analogies to approach the same ideas. In church history, the most famous cultural controversy is between the early Greek church and the early Roman church that spoke Latin. So you've got Latin and Greek. And when two cultures speak two different languages, that is reflective of different cultural presuppositions. And because of the different presuppositions, our different languages produce different analogies for God. And that's led to controversy. That's led to difficulty in understanding one another. When we take the time to actually understand what this analogy or what this figure of speech meant to that group that we're angry with for some reason, we discover after a bit that we're really on the same page. We're not as far apart as we think. So God can be found. He's revealed himself to us. He is said to have a face. And so when we here in the created world look for God, God speaks to us in analogical language, the language of analogy, and it works. Okay, let's talk about the existence of God. How do we know that God exists? There is, first of all, general revelation. And by general revelation, we usually mean the created world, the majesty of creation. When you drive north in Italy, you'll eventually get to the Alps. From Como, it's closer to the Alps than from Reggio, but the Alps are up there, and they are beautiful. From the center in San Lorenzo, I used to get up in the morning and look at the Alps across the fields to the north of us. It's magnificent. But the ocean dashing against the rocks, or a thunderstorm, the creation is a beautiful thing. And when we begin understanding the character of the created universe, we have to think there's a God bigger than all of this, more majestic yet. When we begin looking at the marvels of design in creation, and everywhere we look, both at the very large scale, what is sometimes called the macro level, and at the very small scale, the microscopic level, we find careful, conservative, precise design. This implies a designer. So God is both majestic and he is a designer. He has ordered this universe in such a way that everything works together uh, until sin is introduced into the equation. But we'll talk about that later. Okay. In addition to general revelation, special revelation. Special revelation is the term for scripture. And special revelation is absolutely necessary in order for us to understand general revelation. A clear interpretation of the created universe can't be had without a special revelation. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus shall you say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Oh, that's who created all of this. The I am. God's own self-revelation is necessary for us to know him. We cannot know him on our own. If God had not become a man, had not become this Christ, we would never have known him. We could have known that there has to be a God out there someplace, but without special revelation, it's impossible to put any real knowledge in that container. It's just difficult to accomplish. So special revelation is essential. There are some people who believe that pagans out in their deepest, darkest jungles in Africa may be able to come to salvation on their own just by contemplating the creation and remembering their ancient stories. And there are some people that I actually respect very much who hold that position, but I suspect even more that that's wrong. That God does have to reveal himself in a special way, special revelation. The scripture is essential. The pagan religions can deduce the existence of God, but they go off in all the wrong directions. The scriptures alone will clear the mysteries up. Okay, so let's think about the existence of God. There are some fairly well-known theistic proofs, and we're going to walk through a series of them. We'll start with the cosmological argument, but just to get started, the Bible doesn't contain the theistic proofs. It doesn't bother. I get the impression that the biblical authors are saying, if the idea of the existence of God is so difficult for you that you need a logical proof, then you've got other problems that we can't solve. And the theistic proofs that we're going to look at are not designed to argue non-Christians into the kingdom. The theistic proofs are not designed for evangelism. Actually, every once in a while, I have heard people say that they've been helpful, and I always use every tool I've got when I'm talking to somebody. But I've never seen someone argued into the kingdom or convinced on the basis of logic. The theistic proofs are actually designed in the history of the church to encourage believers about the rationality of their own beliefs. So we're going to start out with what is usually called the cosmological argument. A second note here. I keep making notes to my notes. A second note here is that different theologians give different names to different proofs. there are probably 50 or 60 different theistic proofs. So they're a little hard to categorize. Sometimes the definitions come up differently. The cosmological argument is based on the relationship of cause and effect. The word cosmos means the ordered universe. So you would think that the cosmological argument is an order from, or an argument from order. In fact, it's an argument from the design of an ordered universe. We can think of it as the principle of cause and effect. Here's an American baseball player, and who knows which American baseball player, but there he is. The catcher has just missed his chance to catch the ball because this batter has taken a mighty swing at that ball, has hit it, and it's heading for center field. Okay, we can say that the cause of this event was the swinging of the bat, which is actually quite a complex thing. If you've ever tried to hit a baseball, as I have, you know that it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. A lot of hand-eye coordination and the brain telling the muscles what to do. It's a very complex thing. But when it happens, it's a beautiful thing. And that ball travels quickly and with a marvelous arc all the way out into the field. If there's a wall around that field, it can go over the center field wall, and that's called a home run. It's a wonderful thing. So there goes the ball. You hear the crack, and off goes the ball. There are philosophers in history, a fellow by the name of Hume, Hume, who argued that this is just a coincidence, that there is no cause and effect. But that's irrational, frankly. My own eyes are telling me that batter just took a wonderful swing, and that ball is gone. It's over the center field wall. The cause of the flight of that baseball was the swing of the bat. So when we look at a very nicely defined effect, it's reasonable to think that there is a cause that explains the effect. Now, when we start thinking about that, it starts making pretty good sense. So every effect has a cause, okay? But there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. Think about a string of dominoes. Here in America, we sometimes play with little blocks of wood called dominoes, and if you take dominoes and set them on their short edge so that they're standing up, and you place them a couple of centimeters apart into a pattern or just a long string. I know there's a game you can play with dominoes where you match the numbers, but what everybody I know has always done with dominoes, you just set them up in this long string of standing dominoes, and then you take your finger and tap the first domino so that all of the dominoes in the string fall over. The dominoes will not fall over by themselves. Everyone knows that the effect has to be caused, and there has to be a big thumb bumping the first domino. The dominoes don't just fall over by themselves. The first cause must be uncaused, because if the first cause is itself caused, then you've just got one more domino in the string, and there cannot be an infinite line of dominoes. When we get dominoes for the kids, we'll buy a box of maybe 60 dominoes. And that's how many they have. You can't have an infinite number of dominoes. You set up your 60, and then the first cause, the prime mover, bumps the domino and away it goes. So the universe exists, an orderly universe exists. A reasonable cause for this orderly universe is absolutely necessary. And that cause must itself be uncaused. That's a difficult idea for a lot of people, but that uncaused prime mover is God, and it can't be any other way. Philosophers as early as Plato understood this. Some have argued that Plato must have been a Christian. I don't think so. But he did understand the logic of reality. I mean, the world does in fact exist, and it need not exist. Therefore, it has a cause. That first cause must be uncaused. That's the cosmological argument. It comes in a lot of different forms, and it's helpful to walk through just to see it. That uncaused cause is God. Okay. A second kind of argument is sometimes called teleological. Telos means an end or a purpose to a thing. When we look at the magnificent universe, we see order and design. And this is sometimes called the argument from intelligent design. So we've got all this order, all this design, and it cannot be self-produced. In other words, the orderliness of the universe is not an accident. One great illustration of this is a thing that dates back to the 17th century. A Puritan by the name of William Paley gave the illustration. He said, suppose I was walking in the woods, and alongside the path, I found a watch. And in those days, that would have been a pocket watch, probably made of gold. And when I opened the watch, I discovered that it was still ticking and keeping apparently perfect time. Would I be reasonable to assume that this watch has arisen by purely natural, accidental causes, that different pieces found their way into the woods and assembled themselves by mechanisms we don't understand into this complex thing? Well, no. We do not assume that that watch happened by itself. We do not assume that the watch is the result of a great explosion in a watch factory. We assume that it was left there by somebody who lost it, but it was made on purpose. We know that there was a watchmaker because that's what our logic tells us. The universe is much more complex than a watch, and obviously has tremendous purpose. When we look for the purposes of the elements of design, it's absolutely amazing. The structure of a living cell is absolutely magnificent. It's a nutrient burning, energy producing, life affirming factory on a microscopic level. It's absolutely spectacular. This cannot be self-produced. Life didn't just arise. There's a designer who had to have made the universe, and that designer is God. This we sometimes call the teleological argument. Sometimes we call this the argument from intelligent design. And that's gotten to be very controversial in a lot of the Western world because everybody knows that the intelligent designer has to be God. And people who don't want to be bothered with God in their lives don't like the idea of intelligent design. They prefer evolution and billions of years. Okay, another theistic proof is often called the anthropological argument. This looks at the universe and the solar system and a bunch of other things. The anthropic principle states that the universe and our planet in particular seem to be perfectly tuned for human life. The third planet from the sun just happens to be in exactly the right place. It's the Goldilocks principle. It's not too hot, like Venus or Mercury, not too cold, like Mars or Jupiter. On those other planets, we couldn't live without specialized equipment, and probably not even then. But on Earth, everything works. We have on Earth liquid water, which is an amazing thing. Farther away from the sun, water turns to ice if there is any water. Closer to the sun, it evaporates immediately. And so Venus is covered with clouds, and most of those clouds are made of things that are not hydrogen and oxygen or other nasty things. Earth, on the other hand, has exactly the right balance. And the universe as a whole seems to be designed in such a way that intelligent beings on Earth can study the universe. We're in exactly the right place to get a good look at the Milky Way, for example. And look at the galaxies that make up our own home universe. The clouds that that obscure some parts of the universe are not in the way from the Earth. Why is that? And man seems to be designed in such a way that he's interested in the scientific pursuit of the truths of what holds the universe together. God did that. We have this perfect vantage point, a planet that uniquely favors human life. Man, and by that I mean even little bitty men type people and women type people, fearfully and wonderfully made, according to Psalm 139, both spiritually and physically. Human life is a wonder on so many levels. We human beings are the only ones who think to do theology. Horses and hamsters and rabbits and whatnot perhaps sense that there is a great provider, but they don't have the tools to think about it. You and I do. God has designed us in such a way that not only are we able to examine general revelation, but we can also examine special revelation. This is sometimes called the anthropological proof. Specifically, the universe is designed so that men can not only live, but explore. That implies the existence of a creator. The moral argument is interesting. This would argue that even atheists have a sense of evil. They don't often like to use the word evil because that implies spiritual realities, but I've actually read atheists speak of Christians as a great evil. The greatest evil in the world is you Christians. Okay, well, that's fine. Compared to what? Everyone has a sense of oughtness. We ought to do this. We ought not to do that. right and wrong. Everyone has some sense of it, and they may be warped. Maybe their sense of right and wrong is bent in bad ways, but they have a sense of right and wrong. The question is, what is the standard for right and wrong? Most cultures understand that murder is wrong, but how do you define that? What's the standard for it? If I'm a Muslim and I murder an unbeliever, that's considered perfectly okay under Sharia law. But if I murder another Muslim, that's bad. Well, that's crazy. And yet, at some level, there is a sense of rightness and wrongness. Where do we get that? The standard is a universal standard. There's a universal moral sense, and there must be an external God, a judge, who ultimately will hold us accountable. And all men somehow know that that's true. Okay. The next one is probably the most difficult of all. It goes back to an Oxford scholastic, a monk by the name of Anselm of Canterbury, or Anselm of somewhere. What is he? He got it. He taught at Oxford, sort of. And about 1,000 years ago, he came up with the ontological argument. Ontology is the study of being or existence. Okay. And he was presenting an argument to his fellow monks. So the ontological argument very clearly was not designed to be used evangelistically. He wasn't trying to convince non-Christians of the truth of the Christian position. The ontological argument simply says we have an idea of God. Okay, the name comes to mind. The greatest being exists in our minds, and what attributes would this greatest being necessarily have? And we can think of quite a number of them: holiness and infinity and eternality and so on, that we've already spoken of. But certainly, if he is the greatest being, actual existence would have to be among his attributes. If this greatest being you're thinking about doesn't exist, then you need to keep looking until you find a greatest being who does exist, because that's obviously a greater being. Okay? Therefore, the greatest being must exist, and this greatest being is called God. It's a simple form of it. The ontological argument exists in a lot of different forms, and many Christians find it helpful. Some of us just find it confusing, but it's not designed for non-Christians. It's not designed for evangelism. It's designed to help thinking people work through the rationality of their own belief. Okay. We've got enough time. I'm going to get started here in lecture 5, and we're going to think about the attributes and the names of God. The attributes of God are defined in quite a few different ways. I've got a few quotes from random theologians. The essence of anything, simply put, equals its being or substance plus its attributes. The attributes of God are essential characteristics of the divine being. Without these qualities, God would not be what he is. God. Okay. And here's another one. And I've forgotten who all of these are. One of them is Hodge and another is Walvard, but it doesn't matter. The attributes are inseparable from the being or essence of God. The attributes are qualities of the entire Godhead. They are permanent qualities, intrinsic, essential, and inherent dimensions of his very nature. The attributes should not be confused with properties. Now, I'm not entirely sure why that is, but that's what they say. The various perfections of God or attributes are not component parts of God. Each describes his total being. This is Charles Ryrie. He likes to speak of the perfections rather than the attributes of God. Part of this is because it is difficult to come up with language that really says what we mean. Okay, let's classify the attributes. Some would classify attributes as communicable and incommunicable. That is, we'd ask the question, does man possess a similar attribute? For example, justice. Because men can be just or unjust. Well, we possess a similar attribute, but omnipresence is incommunicable. Only God is omnipresent. So maybe that's helpful for some. Some classify the attributes into moral versus non-moral. Does the attributes fit into the categories of good and evil? For example, holiness is naturally good as opposed to evil, but immutability is neither good nor evil. And some have used that categorization. Transitive versus intransitive is a grammatical term. Does the attribute act upon an object? To be transitive in a grammatical diagram is to take a direct object, to act on something. So to the verb to hit requires an object. What did you hit? Well, I hit the baseball. The verb hit takes the transitive verb base, or the object, the transitive object, baseball. But I can stand intransitively. I don't need an object. Some have liked that. There are the example is love, which has to have an object, versus the divine oneness or unity. God can be one without doing that to anybody, if that makes any sense. Some have divided the attributes up into absolute and relative. So this is a little bit like transitive and intransitive. Is the attribute manifested in relation to something else? So infinity versus eternality. So an infinity of space is omnipresence, but eternality simply is. I would say eternality has to do with time, but this is somebody else's classification. Now, the thing to remember, among theologians, there is no standard classification. There's no standard pairing. There's no normal. Every theologian does it differently. They don't necessarily correspond with one another, and they're not mutually exclusive. The main distinction seems to be this. There are some attributes of God that are inherent within God's own nature, and some exist in relation to creation. The scholastic theologians way back in the Middle Ages made a distinction between Deus in se and Deus pro nobis, that is, God in himself versus God with us. And most of biblical revelation is primarily concerned with the God with us ideas of God. And so God acting upon us or acting with us or creating or loving, those things. Most of the Bible is about that. Okay, attributes of God. We can say that God is infinite with respect to time. That is the eternality of God. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. It's almost no place better than the Psalms to get some of these things. Psalm 102. But thou art the same, thy years will not come to an end. The eternality of God is one of the easiest things to grasp intellectually, but one of the hardest things to really understand. We are not timeless beings. We will always be bound by time, the length of life. God is not. He is completely outside of that. Secondly, omnipresence, infinity with respect to place. This means that God can be everywhere at once. He is not a physical being. He can be and is literally present to the same degree everywhere, all the time. He's everywhere. Psalm 139 is a great psalm. There's a lot of theology in Psalm 139. It's a very, very popular psalm. We memorize these things. But where can I go from thy spirit? Where can I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, which is actually quite tempting sometimes. Let me find an island someplace out in the middle of nowhere and just wait for the world to go by. If I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there, thy hand will lead me, thy right hand will lay hold of me. So God is everywhere. God is thirdly, infinite with respect to knowledge. He counts the number of the stars. He gives names to all of them. I can't even count the number of stars in that photograph. This is one of the Hubble photographs of a galaxy. It's a galaxy with billions of stars in it, very similar to our own galaxy. And you'll notice in this photograph there are other lights in the distance. Each of those is its own full-size billion-star galaxy. And some of those lights are multiple galaxies working with one another. He counts the number. He leads them out by name. Give thanks to the Lord, to him who by understanding, that is a great word there, being, deep intuition, insight into how everything works. By understanding, he made the heavens, for his steadfast love endures forever. Okay. Attributes of God. Omnipotence. What can God not do? Well, nothing. Our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. Psalm 115. Okay. See that thunderstorm coming? There's not a thing in the world you can do to make it go away. God has decided there's going to be a thunderstorm, and that's the way it goes. He is powerful. If he decides that the thunderstorm will dissipate, then away it goes. When Abram was 95 years old, and the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. The Hebrew El Shaddai, the limitless God. Great verse. Okay, when we think of this, think of the power of God in relationship to the resurrection. He was crucified in weakness, but he lives by the power of God. When we contemplate the empty tomb, we're remembering the power of God. Okay, God is immutable. unchanging in his being and character. This doesn't mean he never ordains change. Sometimes things change, and that's also in the purpose of God. I, the Lord, do not change, Malachi 3. But thou art the same, thy years have no end. Every good thing bestowed, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. That's from James chapter 1. God never changes. He doesn't turn on his axis. Okay. God is holy. Moral purity is implied in holiness. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, for I am holy. I am holy, for I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. He is transcendentally majestic, which just means he's not like us. He's totally other. And an angel called to another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called, while the temple was filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, I'm ruined. I'm a man of unclean lips and live among a people of unclean lips. My eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. There's the Isaiah's call in chapter 6 of Isaiah. Holiness is ultimately a separation. The Hebrew word kadosh sounds like the noise that's made when you hit a block of wood with an axe. Kadosh, and you get two separated things. God is utterly separated from sin. He is separate from his creation and cannot be tainted by the sin of creation. The notion of holiness is also can involve a separation for a purpose, but God is utterly separated from everything. And there is no taint of evil in him. Fourthly, God is righteous and just. So a just balance and scales belong to the Lord. God is the standard of righteousness, and that standard is eternal. The Lord is righteous in 2 Chronicles. The Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness, Psalm 11. God shows no partiality. The rules are the rules, which must be nice. God is true. What God reveals is never false. God always remains faithful to his promises. Lamentations 3:23, great is thy faithfulness in the hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised long ages ago, Titus 1. God is the promiser, and on that basis we can hope, because God is always true. In order that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge, laying hold of the hope set before us, Hebrews 6. So another attribute of God, this little guy isn't God, but God is merciful, compassionate, and gracious. He feels compassion for the helpless and the needy. He responds and gives favor where it's not deserved. Psalm 103, the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, astounding or abounding in steadfast love. Let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. God's there, and he cares, and he moves to do what's best. God is loving. He seeks the highest good of humans at his own infinite cost. The focal point of the divine love is the death of Christ on our behalf. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Okay, some more attributes of God. God is wrathful. We have pictures of ancient peoples who believed in wrathful gods, and they made them to look like their own wrathful tyrants, wielding a rod of iron. The Bible speaks of Christ coming to rule with a rod of iron. Oh yes, God is holy and righteous. His nature is offended by sin. You could know with certainty that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. For because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. That's in Ephesians. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. God's angry response to sin, wrath. God is sovereign. This picture on the right is the Narmer palette in Egypt, one of the very earliest pictures of a king. God's sovereignty refers to his right to rule over all things. Kings often assert that they have the sovereignty over everything. That's usually not true. Most politicians are very limited people. Nothing ever happens that God has not willed or allowed. That's what we mean by the sovereignty of God. Everything that happens in the universe is a part of God's plan. Okay, so where are we going with this? The Lord has established his throne in the heavens. His sovereignty rules over all. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many islands be glad. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. The heavens declare his righteousness, and all the peoples have seen his glory. The Lord reigns. He is clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed and girded himself with strength. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. Thy throne is established from of old. Thou art from everlasting. Nothing beats the Psalms. A couple of quick names of God, and we'll be done with this unit. In the Old Testament, Elohim is the generic name for God. It kind of emphasizes his being. It's a plural of majesty, perhaps, although we can't demonstrate that in the Old Testament. Sometimes he is called Adonai. It's a Hebrew word that means Lord or Master. God's proper name or covenant name is Yahweh. We sometimes call this the Tetragrammaton. The four letters YHWH are all that comes up in Hebrew. The meaning of the name is from Exodus 3:14, I am, or probably better, he who is. Yahweh is the God who exists in and of himself. So very important names. Sometimes Yahweh is called simply Yahweh. Sometimes he is called Elohim. Sometimes he is called Yahweh Elohim. Sometimes he is called Adonai Elohim. Sometimes Yahweh Adonai. The names sometimes mix. Sometimes we have other compounds. El Shaddai, El is short for Elohim. El Shaddai means God Almighty. El Elyon means God Most High. And it's a name that we usually find in the mouths of Gentiles. It's not a name that the Hebrews use. El Olam is God who is everlasting, or everlasting God. There are compounds with Yahweh as well. So Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is peace. Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. meaning he leads forth a host of armies. Sometimes that refers to the angels, and sometimes it refers to the stars of the heaven. It doesn't really matter. Yahweh Tzidkenu, Tzedek is righteousness, but this phrase, Yahweh Tzidkenu, means the Lord is our righteousness. And when we come to him, we receive his righteousness. In the New Testament, Theos is the one true God. Speaks of his one unique nature and his transcendence. The term Kurios is a translation of Yahweh, and it can stand for either Adonai or Yahweh in the Old Testament. We usually translate this as Lord, sometimes Master. This refers to the ownership of those who call him Master, speaks of God's authority and supremacy. Okay, on Wednesday, we're going to start looking at the plans of God. And I think on Wednesday, it's going to take us the whole day to get through the topics of creation, providence, the decree, and the dispensations. So we'll come back and do that on Wednesday. Let's stop the sharing here, and I'm going to unmute everybody. Okay, that's hard. As always, I'm going to keep the chat room open in each of these lectures. If you have questions along the way, please do ask. I'd love to be able to help with anything that you're struggling with. And the main thing to struggle with when we're studying doctrine, the main thing to struggle with is falling asleep. I find a lot of material, and most of this should be review for you. What we're doing is putting it together into a package that I think is over the long haul going to be helpful for you. So we'll keep at this. We'll be back on Wednesday. We look forward to seeing everybody on Wednesday. God bless everybody. Love you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. John.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oscar, good to see you, man. Don, hey, try to stay out of trouble, boy. Okay. Brother June, thank you. Mark, I saw you come in there. Good to see you, man.
Good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
My cursor is missing. There it is. There it is. Bye-bye.